From time immemorial, the Gulf Stream has intrigued those navigators who crossed its path. American whalers in the early 18th century were the first to become aware of the path of this powerful current that traversed their fishing waters. Then, in 1769, when Ben Franklin was Deputy Postmaster General for the American colonies, the British authorities commissioned him to investigate why English ships crossing between Europe and America suffered delays of several weeks along the way. Franklin contacted a cousin, a former whaler in Nantucket. He consulted ship's logs and conducted experiments out at sea, all of which led him to discover the existence of a powerful current in the middle of the Atlantic.
Franklin realized that depending on the route that the ship captains took, sometimes it would take much longer to cross the Atlantic Ocean than others. And so it was working with his cousin, Timothy Folger, that he determined that there was this swiftly moving water, a stream, if you will, and he called it the Gulf Stream. And it was that stream of water that if you could get into the stream and allow it to propel you across the ocean,
armed with his discoveries, Franklin set about plotting a precise chart of this river under the sea. And it was in Paris in 1785 that the very first representation of the Gulf Stream was finally published. A prized duplicate has been carefully preserved in Paris in the Department of Charts and Plans in the National Library of France. Department Curator Hélène Richard continually marvels over the preciseness of Franklin's drawings.
L'une des raisons de la notoriété de cette carte, c'est le fait qu'elle n'ait pas été contredite sur le plan scientifique. Elle a été complétée, elle a été relativisée, mais elle n'a pas été contredite. La véracité de cette carte, la réalité de cette carte en a fait la notoriété.
According to Franklin, the Gulf Stream stopped somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. 2 centuries later, however, progress in oceanography enabled scientists to completely and accurately represent the surface of the ocean current. What we now call the Gulf Stream is a powerful surface current whose flow corresponds to 150 times the flow of all the Earth's rivers combined. Driven by the trade winds, its origins lie in the Gulf of Mexico, from which it gets its name. It carries the tropical waters from the Florida Strait to the Great Banks of the New World. The Gulf Stream then heads eastward, where it splits into several branches, one of which carries its warm waters to the borders of the North Atlantic. It is this North Atlantic drift that one commonly associates with the Gulf Stream, which is largely responsible for the mildness of European winters. But the Gulf Stream's voyage has only just begun. As soon as the tropical waters hit the Arctic Ocean, they cool abruptly and plunge towards the abyssal zone to form a loop known as thermohaline circulation. Then, like an immense conveyor belt that slows down in the ocean depths, it sets out again southward to rejoin the beginning of the Gulf Stream off the American coast. Without these beautiful mechanics, the Invereux Gardens would be a barren moor flattened by winds, and the Breton frigodems would have to break through the ice for their wintertime swims.
Yes, good afternoon, Bill. I'm speaking from Italy. Now it's 11 p.m. I begin my work with the University of Colorado that gave me the maps of 6 satellites, Topex, Jason, Poseidon, Geosat, Follow-On, Ersat, and Envisat. And
these are different satellites, in other words, that you're using in order to get access to the satellite data over the Gulf.
Yes. And I checked the data with my system of calculus. This is SHT calculus. It's a calculus based about the theory of categories, which I work since 10 years. So after the checking of the data, I observed a fracture in the loop current, which is one of the most important components of the Gulf Stream, which carries the warm current into the Atlantic circulation of the Gulf Stream. The first breakdown was observed and checked by me on May the 11th. And with the formation of a big eddy clockwise. And the second event was on June the 12th. And it was only the beginning of a series of breaking. Nowadays, yesterday, I am observing now about 8 eddies of the loop currents. So if they have just stopped the coming off of the oil, I am continuing in observing a breaking down of the loop current. Now you see these are complex physics. There are critical phenomena, unpredictable because they are ruled by nonlinear equations. So if the loop current will go on to be fractured, to be broken, sorry for my English, it may have serious consequences on the entire Gulf Stream. You know, this is very critical situation. This is a natural equilibrium made up of currents of salinity or flora and fauna of the whole Gulf, and maybe irreversible compromise by about, they say, about more than 1 billion liters of oil. That's,
yes. So what we're talking about is that the normal mechanism, which is very sensitive, for making the Gulf current, which is one of the major timepieces for the whole world climate, not just the North Europe, has now been disrupted. As you mentioned in an analogy you gave, if you had a small pool and you started a current moving it around in the pool and then you poured in oil, the current moving that flow of the water would stop. And in fact, what's happening is the oil isn't stopped by any means. It's a lie with a collaboration of British Petroleum, the private army that's protecting them from getting access to the real data, and internal departments of the government and the Interior Department. And the fact is, this is going to precipitate not enough energy to the escalator current that brings warm waters to Scotland, Northern Europe, and the world climate, and these systems are all connected worldwide. And what you're saying is the escalator current is now dead. It is stopped. It is not going to go with enough energy to bring the warm waters to Europe, so it's immediately going to precipitate a massive decrease in warming climate to these parts of the world, and it's going to change the world climate now.
Yes, many people, many other physicists, and I don't know what government says, because I am in Italy. I don't know what's the official position of the government and BP, but some people think it will be restored, the equilibrium naturally, but I say it's impossible to predict what will happen.
From time immemorial, the Gulf Stream has intrigued those navigators who crossed its path. American whalers in the early 18th century were the first to become aware of the path of this powerful current that traversed their fishing waters. Then, in 1769, when Ben Franklin was Deputy Postmaster General for the American colonies, the British authorities commissioned him to investigate why English ships crossing between Europe and America suffered delays of several weeks along the way. Franklin contacted a cousin, a former whaler in Nantucket. He consulted ship's logs and conducted experiments out at sea, all of which led him to discover the existence of a powerful current in the middle of the Atlantic.
Franklin realized that depending on the route that the ship captains took, sometimes it would take much longer to cross the Atlantic Ocean than others. And so it was working with his cousin, Timothy Fulton,